Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here with us today, especially so close to the holidays. All right. I see more folks joining. This is great. All right. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you're calling in from. Thank you for joining us today for To Create Fearlessly Assess Risk First with risk assessment expert Colin Pereira. We are delighted to have you all here with us for this highly sought after informational production content. My name is Maria Santos. I serve as the Artist Services Manager for the International Documentary Association. I use she, her, they pronouns. In my Zoom window, you can see me from the shoulders up. I am a chubby brown woman with black hair pulled back into a bun. I'm wearing a green sweater that goes all the way up to my neck, and it's paired with purple and silver earrings. A few housekeeping notes before we start. We have captions turned on for this webinar, which you can activate at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar, usually found in your Zoom window. We will be recording the presentation part of the session, and we will make the recording publicly available through the IDA video library for 1 month, after which it will only be accessible through the member portal. During the presentation, if you have a question, please enter it into the Q&A box, also found usually at the bottom of your Zoom window in the toolbar. As Colin presents, I'll be monitoring the Q&A box for questions relevant to his material. I will raise your questions to him, and he'll incorporate the questions throughout. My colleague and personally just inspiring human being, Anissa, the IDA memberships manager, will also be monitoring the chat. However, it's best to direct all questions to the Q&A box just so that I don't miss it. We will do our best to answer all of your questions. Please note, this presentation is 1.5 hours long. There is a lot of detailed information to cover. We have reserved an extra 30 minutes of Q&A with Colin in case there were any unanswered questions. But if all questions have been answered, we can all head out even earlier. Okay, so just taking a deep breath, but without further ado, I'm going to introduce Colin Pereira. Colin is a leading risk and safety expert who spent over 15 years shaping safety strategies for journalists working in high-risk and fragile environments. As a co-founder of RiskPal and director of HP Risk Management, he has advised leading news teams and content makers covering wars, disasters, and civil unrest, enabling safer reporting through tailored risk assessments and crisis management. Previously, Pereira held prominent roles as head of high-risk security for ITN, deputy head of BBC's high-risk team, and safety strategist for the Committee of Protected Journalists. In a time when filmmakers are being censored for creating meaningful work with strong, important messages that powerful interests may not want revealed, we need to know how to protect our film teams and our work. Before defaulting to preemptive self-censorship, there are key questions you may want to ask yourself and your team about your goals and the risks associated with them. While we can't eliminate all risk, even stepping outside of your home is a risk, we can be strategic and plan for contingencies to safeguard a film and its message. So Colin will arm us with the information to do so. So Colin, please join us here on the virtual stage.
Can everyone hear me? I think I've just unmuted, so I should be
Yes, we can hear you.
audible. Oh, perfect. Great. Well, just lovely to meet you all, and thanks for taking the time so soon before Christmas to tune in to this session, and thank you to the IDA for hosting me. Before I start presenting, I just want to give a little bit about my background. When we did this in person in New York a few weeks back, one of the things that was coming through is my experience with newsrooms, and I have done a lot with newsrooms because it's sort of it's the kind of organizations I work for. But obviously, because I've covered very big organizations, content making organizations, I've covered a lot of longer format, long form content production, and these days I'm working a lot with creators. And as Maria said, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. As I go along, I'm really happy to stop and deal with the questions as we go. And there's no monopoly on the truth. So if you feel I'm saying something that's wrong or erroneous at any point or not relevant to filmmakers, please jump in there and speak up. Great. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, perfect. So obviously that's the headline. Oh, and one other thing I should mention before I start. I apologize if there's background noise. About 5 minutes before 10 minutes before this began, some builders walked into a property nearby me and started drilling. So I've asked them to stop, but hopefully they comply. Okay, great. So given the kind of threats that we're going to be talking about, there may be some sensitive topics that cover violence and death. And upsetting subjects during this conversation. So, if you're feeling upset, please feel free to stop or mute me for a while, and then and if you've got any really specific concerns or you want to talk about it, you can email me afterwards. I'm sure Maria will share my email with you all. Okay, great. So, as Maria said, the purpose of this training is not to eliminate risk, but it's to enable you to make intentional decisions that incorporate safety as you go along your day-to-day, as you make content and make films. Often, I speak to a lot of people who are in trouble, quite frankly, and often the conversation will come back to this point that they say, oh, we did this thing, and we knew at the time that we shouldn't have done it, but it was so important from an editorial perspective, so we had to do it. And we were a bit worried, and our gut was kind of telling us not to do it, but we did it anyway. And I often speak to people who have deep regrets about those decisions. So what I want people to do after this conversation, hopefully, or this presentation, is that when they encounter these kind of junctions in their decision making, is they consider the safety aspect in its entirety, and they really weigh up the risk versus reward equation, essentially. So I want you to think about safety intentionally, effectively. Now, just going back to the point of the kind of things that I've worked on, these are some of the documentaries I've worked on, and I've worked on a load, everything from wildlife filmmaking to, longer format in hostile environments and conflict zones. But I have worked a lot in the States in the last, since 2016, which came as a bit of a surprise to me, in terms of the ongoing threat to filmmakers and content creators, particularly online, and that manifests itself in risks to individuals physically, so to speak. Okay, so basically, the kind of things I have to deal with are on camera. On screen now. Okay, and the way... Sorry, just tell me something, Maria. Anissa, can you see my cursor on the screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so the kind of threats that I deal with are all on camera right now. And they come in generally they come in a sort of an order when we're dealing with them. And what happens is people tend to start off getting online abuse. These days, it's extremely common in our Twitter sphere or X sphere and social media spheres to be recipients of online abuse. And I would say the majority of content creators I work with, whether they be journalists or people on YouTube or long-form filmmakers, they are increasingly exposed to large amounts of online abuse. And what that does is it makes people inured to abuse, and they just accept it as part of the game that we're in. Okay? But the problem with it is if you ignore it, which many people do, in all of this noise, there is a signal, and there is someone telling you that they really mean you harm. And if you don't see that signal, then you can be in a lot of trouble later down the line. So what we advise a lot of our clients to do is to, while they might not be the ones monitoring the online abuse if they are receiving it, it might be someone, a colleague or a friend, or someone like me. They really, if they are the recipient of vociferous and really aggressive abuse that's threatening, they should get someone to monitor it and just flag when there is something that they feel really concerned about. What online abuse leads to is a lot of anxiety. And I think as sort of Western society, we have an anxiety pandemic, quite frankly. And in filmmaking and content creation, the vast majority of people I deal with are anxious these days. So those two things go hand in hand. But what we then see when people are really upset with you, so you're making a film and you've upset someone, this often leads to a legal attack, especially if you're making a film against a institution or an entity. And that when a legal attack is they file a lawsuit to stop you doing what you're doing, okay, or disrupt you in some way. And the current administration in the US is really good at it. They've just filed a $5 billion lawsuit against my old employer, the BBC, as in Trump has taken on the BBC. And the aim is to disrupt and stop you doing what you want to do. Now, that is particularly expensive because you need to take legal advice when this happens. And it's quite unnerving, quite frankly. But it's if you don't get, but the good thing about a legal attack is it means that the people who are engaging with you or threatening you follow the rules, okay, to a large extent. And so it's not a great thing, but it's better than going direct to violence, quite frankly. But if the legal attack does not work and you don't shut up and you continue doing what you're doing, this can result in confrontational violence. Okay, so say you're making a film about individuals, right? Let's just say you're making a film about a community, and that community gets upset with you for what you're doing. They try and stop you legally. If that doesn't work, someone will stop you in the street and start shouting at you, okay, and threaten you verbally. This happens quite a lot, increasingly, particularly to journalists as they go about their day-to-day. And you need to be prepped to how to respond to that, which we'll come to later. Now, if you're taking on the government in some way or a foreign government, this can then lead to arrest and detention. Okay, and we'll go into that later. Or in the US, what we're seeing a lot of is people are being disrupted by visa issues, right? Or they are very anxious about their legal status to remain in America, for example. And that is sometimes just dropped into a conversation when you're talking to a member of the government or even members of the public. There was a case earlier this year where some journalists were covering an award show, non-controversial, but the individuals covering it were Hispanic, and they started getting abuse online saying, "We're going to tell ICE about your families." And that caused great levels of anxiety, quite frankly. So, these are the kind of issues that are arising on an everyday basis these days. But and once the online abuse starts, you go into smearing. So they try and discredit you. So they say, this filmmaker basically is rubbish. Why would you ever listen to them? They're biased, etc., etc. You get threats. In extreme cases, you get doxing. I'm sure everyone's pretty familiar with doxing, but just in case you're not, it's when your personal details are released about you online, so your home address, your kids' names, for example, and people will put things out like, this filmmaker who lives at this address has been up to making a film about our community. I'm not inciting any violence, but I just suggest you write them a letter to their home address, or you pay them a visit. Okay, so that's increasingly happened, and that's very unnerving when it happens. Swatting is an even more serious situation where your enemy, for want of a better word, will phone the police and say, "I'm standing outside the filmmaker's house. I can hear screams coming from inside the house. I think they're killing a child or something, or there's some sort of crime going on," and the police will burst in. Will come to your house and then try and break down the door, something like that. I know of a few cases where that's happened. It's not so common, but it's growing and very concerning. And fixated intimidation is really to do with stalking. It's connected to surveillance, and hacking is another way that they really disrupt you, but that's very sophisticated. So hacking, surveillance, and targeted violence tend to be quite sophisticated opponents that you're dealing with. Okay, and generally, before there's any sort of targeted violence, so this is an individual comes to beat you up, they need to know where you are, they need to be able to follow you, and so they will watch you, right? And they'll try and track you down. And if you spot them when they're doing this, then you can anticipate that there might be a violent action against you, and you want to, and you take measures to stop that. And often, I, as a security consultant, am called in at this stage when there's surveillance, right? So a lot of these things have already happened. And I'm often called in when there's surveillance or when it's doxing, swatting, fixated intimidation. But at this stage where it's legal, smearing, threats, anxiety, people tend to try and deal with that on their own. Okay. And that's not wrong, but you should talk to other people about it if that's happening to you. Okay, so I'm going to jump slide. So when we as security advisors are dealing with a big organization carrying out a long form, this is the process we follow, right? From start to finish. So we begin with a risk. So they come to us and they pitch their commissioners, or they pitch an idea. And then those people will come and talk to us, and we will carry out a risk assessment and threat mapping, okay? And we're going to go into all of this in detail, but I'm just going to run through it very quickly. So this is the overall picture of everything you should be doing in an ideal world, but you don't have to, you don't always have to do it. Sorry, I'm just moving something on my screen out of your way. So we begin with a risk assessment. And in that risk assessment, we will talk about who are the people doing the long form documentary or the film, who are actually involved in the task. Are they the right people for the job? Are they the right ethnicity, religion, gender, whatever it is that gives them access to this community? Okay, and I'm going to talk a lot about access later, because access is the basis of safety. So we want to really know who are the people who are doing the task. Okay. And sometimes the team that are working on it are not best placed to do it. Okay. And I'll just tell you a little personal story. So I used to work as a producer on a news show. And one day the news show said to me, "Listen, we want you to phone up someone in Ireland and get access to this story about the IRA, the Irish Republican Army." This individual had been a member of the Irish Republican Army at a point in their life. And when I phoned them up, they spoke in a heavy Irish brogue accent, and I couldn't understand a word they were saying. And all my interactions with them were very difficult because I couldn't understand them. But because it was a very competitive environment, I could not say to my bosses or the people who had hired me that I didn't understand what these people were saying, or this individual was saying to me. And I nearly had the whole bit of the show cancelled, because I wasn't self-aware enough or confident enough to say to my colleagues, listen, I'm probably not the right person to do this. So that's what I mean by team selection. Are you the best place to do the task in hand? Budgeting. Look, I know most filmmakers have very little budget, but it's really important and that you think about safety at the beginning of your endeavor or throughout, just to say, if this goes wrong, how much money do I have to fix this problem? And if I don't have money, how am I going to find a way around this issue to fix it? Okay. And everything I'm going to tell you about is actually pretty cheap or free in most cases. Equipment selection, we can come back to that later. Contingency planning. So that's the case of what, if this goes wrong, what am I going to do about it? Okay. And so that is scenario planning. So you sit down at the beginning and say, I'm doing this documentary into this community. What if they get very upset and they threaten me? What will I do about it? Okay. So this is an overall picture of all the risks. And then every day or every time you're on assignment, what you need to do is do a task risk assessment. You need to understand reactions. So when something happens on task, you need to react to it. You need to learn all the time from what's going on. So if someone is getting increasingly annoyed with you through the course of your filmmaking, which might last a very long time, obviously, in some cases, years, I know, you need to react to it and adapt to it and not just plow through the risks regardless because you've got a deadline or because you want to finish the story, right? You need to react. And often I meet people who they've got tunnel vision. They don't want to acknowledge that things are changing, that their contributor is getting upset with them, and now is a safety hazard, and they just want to finish what they've started, right? And so they're not doing these three things. They're not doing a risk assessment on task, they're not reacting to the risk, and they're not learning from what's happening around them. And on every task, you need to have crisis management, which is essentially contingency planning. So what happens if we get chased out of this community? And then after the event, so after you broadcast or published your piece, you need to think about the long-term threat, okay? And this, again, is a huge area that we work on, right? Because now, many years afterwards, the risk can manifest itself, as we've learned from Afghanistan, right? So you put out a documentary in 2018, and 2022, people are phoning you up and saying, we're at risk from the Taliban, and you've got to help us get out. So the long tail of your film can be very, very long. Okay. So, Maria, do I have any questions or can I just crack on?
I think just keep going. There's a question in the chat that's specific to their film, but we can do that after. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so going back to this slide, risk assessment and threat mapping. Now, you can go online, Google risk assessment, and you'll get lots of methodology. You'll get these risk matrices that pop up showing how you plot risks and things like that. And they're great, and that's what we kind of do every day, but they can be daunting and they can seem, quite frankly, bureaucratic. Okay? Risk assessment is ingrained in human nature. Right? And the reason I know that, and I know why you guys are all good at risk assessment on this call, is because you're alive. Okay? So pretty much from the age that you can crawl, your brain is doing a risk assessment around you, okay? Initially, when you're babies, you kind of rely on your parents to guide you. But as you become more and more independent, your risk assessment skills improve, okay? And if you're alive, it's because you're good at doing risk assessment. So the thing that you have to do to risk assess, right, it's like crossing the road. You look both ways before you cross the road, and if you see a car coming, you stop. You don't cross the road. It's the same in filmmaking or any sort of content creation. When you are carrying out a task or when you're carrying out an operation, you look both ways. You ask yourself, is there a risk attached to what I'm doing? In order to understand that, what you need to know is, what am I doing? Right? And you need to break that down. So let's just go back to this example that I'm banging on about, is you're making a film in a community about the changing nature of education in the community, and it's becoming more religious, shall we say, or religious orientated. Okay? And religion is being more introduced into the curriculum, shall we say, right? I'm just making this up as I go along. What are the risks? What are you doing? You're going to have to go into the school. You're going to have to meet teachers. You're going to have to meet parents. You're going to have to meet school kids. You're going to have to get consent forms, do all of this. And at some point, there's going to be friction, because for this to be editorially exciting, someone has to like that there's more religion coming into the school curriculum, and someone else has to not like that. Okay, and that's your friction point between those individuals that you're filming, and they might not like being caught on camera. Okay, so what am I doing exactly? How am I filming this? How am I getting to these individuals? Are they a threat to me? Are the individuals that I'm speaking to just average parents and average teachers, or does one of these individuals have a criminal record? Have they got a history of violence? Are they very volatile? Do they have a history of attacking people that they don't know in some way? Are they digital security experts? Can they hack me? Right? These are all questions that you should be asking, and ideally writing down to say, and ideally the answers will come back no, but in reality, some of those things will come back saying yes. So one of the parents will have a drinking problem or a history of violence or something, and therefore you need to be more careful dealing with that individual, right, in this fictitious situation that I'm making up. Again, going back to, am I the right person for the job, right? Am I going into this community and something about my color of my skin, is it going to rile up the community? Are they not going to trust me because of who I am? Now, that doesn't mean that I don't do the task, but it means I need to spend more time building trust with that community or with those individuals, so that they do trust me and they do welcome me in there, right? And so, for going back to that example of where I couldn't understand the accent of the individual I had to speak to, building trust was impossible, because I couldn't actually even speak to the individual, right? So I was not the right person for the job, because I could not get into a relationship with them, because I just couldn't understand a word they were saying. And they thought I was being very condescending to them. So again, look at who's involved. If you're sending a researcher into this community, are they the right people for the job?
Colin,
yes.
I have one question, which is, what are some strategies for building trust? I'm not sure if you're going to go into that a bit later.
I will go into that a bit later, but I can talk about it very quickly now. So trust is based on essentially it's continuity. Okay, so it's continuity and connection. Okay, so if you connect with an individual in some way, you find something that is a connecting factor between you. So you have something in common, and you share that with them. Okay, they can be completely different from you, but you can empathize with them, and they can empathize with you, hopefully, right? And so you build a relationship based on that connection. And then a huge part of trust is doing what you say you will do. So if you say, I'm going to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning, you need to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning. Can't keep them waiting. Okay? Because if you do, if you keep them waiting, you're unreliable, and that erodes trust. Okay, so we can go into this a lot. I will talk about this a little bit more, but it's creating a rapport, and then being a reliable individual. right? And the thing about long form is you have to spend a lot of time with these people generally, right? And so you have to do this every day, all the time, or have a really good reason why you're not doing this. So they only need one reason not to trust you. And we have a line in our consultancy actually with our clients, which is you're either building trust or you're losing it. And there's no in between. So everything you do impacts the trust level between you and your contributors and your staff as well, or your colleagues. And this directly relates to experience, right? Which is the next point on the slide. So people who are experienced know that. They know that they have to be trustworthy to their contributors. People who are inexperienced, turn up late often, or they say they'll do something and they just don't, right? And so, what I like to see when I'm working on a high-risk story, right, is the experience level of people. And by that, and that's not an age-related thing, okay? That is, so when we're working, sometimes one of the big stories we work with in the UK is stabbing, right? So for the last decade, there have been a lot of stabbings in the UK amongst communities, all to do with drugs and gangs, and where the gang lines meet, basically, or the gang areas of control meet, and on those in those areas of disputed control, youngsters are stabbing other youngsters, right? Because they're connected to the gang. And countless amount of filmmakers and content creators have gone in to interview the gang members, interview the hierarchy, and we ask a lot of questions about experience to do with those people, because they have to fit in with that community, right? Because it's about building trust. So if they don't behave like those individuals in some way, or they don't have a connection, they're not going to have the trust. And often the people who make the best films in those situations are people who have street smarts, who have operated in those kind of environments before, because maybe they're from that environment, okay? And they will get access better than anyone else. So that's what we mean by experience, right? And so in those stories about stabbings, because it's kids who are stabbing other kids, the best filmmakers are really young people, right? Who could speak the same language as the kids and are accepted effectively. And, and the other thing is, in your risk assessment, is don't just assume you know everything, right? There's no monopoly on the truth, as I said. So what you need to do is you need to ask a lot of people. So going back to the story about the gangs, right? We want to know what the environment is like before people go in there. So we ask a lot of former gang members, right, who have reformed. What is this like? What do you think? If we put a crew in there like this, how are they going to react? And a very common question that comes up to me in this gang story is, should we wear a stab vest? Okay. And from a safety perspective, if you're just following your risk matrix thing, yes, you should absolutely wear a stab vest. But here's the problem. When you speak to former gang members about a filmmaker going in wearing a stab vest, what that says is, I don't trust the gang around me, protect me. Okay, or I think you're a threat. So it immediately creates a barrier. And so wearing the stab vest actually creates greater risk to you. And you can only know that because when you speak to gang members, i.e. the people you ask for advice, they go, don't do that. No one's going to respect you, and people are going to think you're scared, and that's then going to result in someone targeting you. Okay? So basically, what are you doing exactly? Break it down. Who is involved in this? Who are you talking to? Who's around? Who's involved in your task on your staffing side? But who are the contributors you're involved with? Does your identity in some way impact the safety? Are you experienced enough to do this, or do you have the right experience? And who else has told you that this is the way to do things? Okay, so that's all you need in a risk assessment, effectively. And I know you're good at it because you're alive. So you do this every day, right? And if you go for a job, this is what you do, right? If you do anything novel or new, you kind of do this automatically. But this is a discipline, right? And you've got to do this every day. And what happens for long form filmmakers, I find in my experience, is they get comfortable. So they'll do this at the beginning when they're going in with the gang or they're going into the community. Then they'll build relationships and they'll just assume, or they'll feel that they're safe, which is human nature. Okay, to feel like that, and you'll feel that the contributors trust you and you trust them, and that everything is fine. And something will come out of nowhere, and the threats will arise because you said something or you did something that basically upset someone, and all that trust will will break apart. Okay, very quickly. And you've got to remember you're there doing a professional job, which I know often for filmmakers it's not that you're not professionals, but it becomes personal, right? Because you're so connected to the individuals you're working with. But this is a discipline, right? Risk assessment, risk management is a discipline, right? And you can't let your personal feelings get involved in it because it can end really badly if you do. Okay, so I'll jump to the next slide. So part of understanding the risk is what could go wrong, right? Because this has a direct implication to whether you should be doing what you want to do. Okay, so is the risk versus the reward? And the reward might be great, right? You might win an Emmy, you might win an Oscar, whatever it is, right? But it's not going to help you if you're in a hospital bed, like a vegetable because someone smacked you in the head, quite frankly, right? While you were doing your job. So those awards don't count for much in those circumstances. So what you need to work out is, going into this situation, I'm going in with a gang to do a story about knife crime. What would happen if I got stabbed? Right? How bad would that be? Am I likely to be killed? Is there a hospital nearby that I can go to very quickly? Do I have enough insurance to cover me? All of these things you've got to factor in, right? And that doesn't mean that you stop. So if you're going in to cover a gang and there's stabbings, and you might be a victim of stabbing, maybe you do a first aid course, right? And you have a first aid kit with you at all times, and you have all your colleagues who are trained, because that can save your life, quite frankly, right? Maybe you take out a higher level of insurance, or maybe you don't expose yourself to the people who are likely to really cause you harm. So these are all things you need to consider, right? The other thing is who else can be impacted, not just you, right? So one of the biggest issues I face with journalists, filmmakers, and content creators is that they do a great risk assessment on themselves, but they don't think about their families often. And sometimes, and this is particularly the case with digital security, right? So you're going into this community or this gang or whatever it is, you upset them, and they go, how can I hurt Colin the most? And they say, I'm going to start harassing his wife online. Okay, and I'm going to go onto Facebook or Instagram, I'm going to cut a picture of their kids, which my wife has posted, and I'm going to send it to the wife, and I'm going to say, your kids should die, or something like that, right? And my wife is going to get really upset with me, and she's going to come and shout at me and say, how could you have done this thing? Why did you go in with the gang? Why are you now threatening our family? Okay? And that happens all the time, right? Because people realize if you target the families, there's a high chance you're going to stop doing whatever you're doing that's upsetting them, right? So you need to protect your family. You need to get your wife to take the pictures of your kids off Instagram. You need to get her to stop posting if that's what she does. And you need to put a lot of digital security in place around your bank accounts, two-factor authentication. You need to protect your mortgage, any sort of digital fraud, because I have had a lot of journalists in particular who their families have been bankrupted. Like literally people have gone into the bank accounts and stolen money. Okay. So if you're doing something where the enemy or the perpetrator might get really upset and they've got the ability to carry out that kind of activity against you, you need to do the bare minimum, which is like protect yourself digitally. And then from a physical perspective, like have security on your property, right? Have a Ring doorbell or a camera or something, right? Which these things are not massively expensive and they can, quite frankly, save your life. Okay?
Colin,
Yeah.
we have an interesting question, which is, as filmmakers, folks have to balance between having a public profile in order to promote their film, but you're saying that they actually have to scrub the internet of their information. So how do you balance between the two?
Yeah. So what you should do is have a personal social media presence, if that's what you want, and a professional one. Okay. So the professional one is about promoting your film and saying, this is what we're doing. Your personal one is for your friends and your family. If you have that, right? I would advise you don't have a personal one, quite frankly, but lots of people do. And basically you don't want to open up your personal profile to your professional life. So you want to keep the privacy settings on your personal social media or online presence really, really high. And you don't want the two to pollute each other, right? Now that again is a discipline. And it's really hard because a lot of people have built their brand on the back of their personal profile. And for some people, it's impossible to unwind it, right? But if you can, I would really suggest that you do so. I would suggest that you go back through your profile and say, is there anything here that reveals something really personal about me? So is your birthday out there, right? A lot of banks use your birthday as your as a sort of identifier, right? When you phone up the helpline or whatever it is. So if your birthday is on your Facebook account, or there's an Instagram picture of you blowing out your candles on your birthday cake, that tells someone what day you were born, right? So maybe get your friends to throw you a birthday party on a day that's not your birthday, and put that on Instagram or whatever social media is your preference, because then basically you're putting out information, but it's not the right information and it doesn't help anyone hack you. Does that answer the question?
Yes, and actually we got another one, which is, what do you think of third-party services that scrub information online, like email, address, and other personal information? And actually, this is a good question to just do a little time check on, because we're about halfway through the time.
Yeah. And I've got loads to go through, actually, quite frankly. Let me jump ahead, actually, because there'll be a lot of questions about digital security, right? So, look, with regards to services that scrub you, like Delete Me, it really depends on the jurisdiction you're in, right? So Delete Me is quite expensive, but it's worth it if you're in the United States. They have a sort of Delete Me premium, which if you're not in the United States, sorry, I don't know where the audience is tuning in from, but if you're not in the United States, Delete Me is less useful. There are things you should know about these services is that, like, basically it takes months and months to do a proper scrub, and they're not 100%. So if you're going to start a film or you're beginning a project and you're worried about digital security, buy Delete Me well in advance, right? Or before you launch your film, do the scrub well in advance. So I would say, before you do that, what you should do is Google yourself, find out the personal details, remove what you can remove yourself, like any pictures you've geotagged or anything like that, anything, birthdays, as we were saying, and then add two-factor authentication, check your entire social media profile, and then you can hire a third party to delete you. You can do it yourself, right? So you can write to Google and say, please remove me, but it takes ages and ages, right? So if you're in a jurisdiction where delete me doesn't work, for example, it's a good idea to begin this process well in advance with Google or whoever the search engines are. But now, thanks to AI, what I would really recommend is that you do a search for yourself on AI. And what I would say during the course of your film or your work, do this like once a month minimum, because people might be adding stuff about you, and they might be gathering intel, or stuff might be pushed out about you that you don't know about, right? So basically search for yourself regularly. And things that you need to do is, like, these are the basics, okay? And everyone knows this stuff, but not everyone does it. So have a password manager if you can. I mean, I hate them, quite frankly. I hate my password manager, but it's really effective. So use unique passwords. Always have two-factor authentication on anything that you're using. If you're having really sensitive conversations or things that might be used against you, like if you're passing through a border or something like that, and the border guard asks to see your device, use apps like Signal or WhatsApp and have automatic delete messages on them. And it's not just for passing through like borders. Like if you're going into a gang area and the gang asks to see your phone, because sometimes they do, you don't want to have any incriminating evidence on your phone, right? And I would say use burner devices for those kind of projects. Update your devices, right, from the regularly, which actually loads of people don't do. Loads of people don't bother updating their security patches, and they should. Use a VPN, which is a pain, especially if you're sending large files over it, but you should plan for that. Encryption, and do regular backups, right? A huge thing in Europe, I don't know about in the US, but I'm guessing it's the same, is, there's been a large number of cyber attacks, right? And one of the favored targets, or certainly a target that is very common, is production houses, right? To steal footage or hack into a system, secure the footage, and then demand a ransom for it. Okay, because obviously once the footage is your life's work might be on your drive, and if it's hacked and someone says, pay me $10,000 to release it, you're going to do that, right? If you've spent years and years doing it. So really, really encrypt and back up everything. And the most important thing, and I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times, is listen, if you are doing all of this, it's great, but you're only as good as the weakest link in your chain. Right. So if your boss doesn't do these things and you do all the encryption, but they don't have two-factor authentication on their devices because they can't be bothered, the hackers will just go to that person. Okay. They'll literally sniff out that individual. So these are the basics. I'll share these slides with you because, just so you have them on with you. Okay. So conscious of time, we should hurry up. So, think about damage control. Let's just jump that. And listen, if you need a risk assessment, you can go onto the CPJ website. There's a risk assessment template. It's quite heavily focused on hostile environments and hazards, but it does the same thing as any risk assessment, right? It asks you all the questions you need to ask. And you can fill that out. Okay, so let's go back to trust and access. I should rename this slide trust, actually. Maria, are you happy? Do you want me to, have I answered everything, or?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So trust and access is by far your biggest guarantee of safety. Okay, because let's just go back to this gang example. You're going into a territory belonging to a gang. And if the risks are you upset them and they hurt you, or another gang sees what you're doing and is like, why are you paying attention to the gang A? Why aren't you paying attention to gang B? And they hurt you, right? Or the police come and arrest you, right? Those are the three risks, pretty much. I mean, there are a lot more risks, but let's just say those are the three. How do you negate like 90% of that risk is by getting friendly with the gang that's hosting you and getting them to guarantee your safety. Okay. And that is really, really difficult. So filmmakers who pull off amazing feats, right? Invest the time, amazing feats of filmmaking where they go into places that you just don't think they can get into and they come out safely unscathed. And you're like, how did you go in with this Mexican cartel? Right. It's because they've spent the time building a relationship with the key people involved. And quite frankly, when ideas come across our desk, this is a huge thing that we look at. We're like, who are the people doing the task? Do they have the experience? And what is their access? What gets them in the door? Right? And is there someone protecting them when they're doing this? So let's just go back to this example of a gang because it's a simple example. So you're going to go film with this gang. You know the gang members. You know the gang leader, right? And you've asked them a lot of questions about the safety on the ground. You know how they operate, and they are happy to have you there. Now, we're going to go into that a lot more in a second, because that's a crucial thing, right? They're happy to have you, but you're doing your risk assessment, and you've got to ask, how did I get in here? Right? Who introduced me to them? Did I just know this individual, this gang member, or did someone introduce me to them? Right? Because if something goes wrong, the introducer to this situation is often the person you turn to get you out of that problem. So that could be a journalist, a priest, a social leader, a former gang member who runs a refuge for gang members, that kind of thing, right? Is this person going to be able to intervene to save you should you upset the gang? Okay. And in my experience, those interlocutors, they're crucial, right? Without them, without understanding this human terrain that protects you, you can't do any sort of risk management. And you guys will have this in your head when you're doing it, right? You will know this intimately, but you don't necessarily write it down and you don't necessarily communicate it to others. And part of the process that I go through with filmmakers is to say, explain this to me. Explain to me, if you get into trouble, who do I phone to help you? Right now, you might not have access to a person like me as a security advisor, but you have access to family, friends, those kind of things. And you have access to the IDA. You might want to explain it to them and say, look, if I get into trouble, this is who you phone. Right? And there are some really random people who come to the forefront when you're in trouble. Right? And they're people you don't expect. So like, again, I'm conscious of time, but just a quick little story. So, a few years back, there were loads of kidnaps going on in Somalia and, kidnaps of ships, like hijacking of ships, but also kidnappings of individuals, and a number of journalists were kidnapped. And the major interlocutor who would go into the tribes who would carry out the negotiation was a London taxi driver, right, who was a Somali, and he was so shocked that his community back in Somalia was carrying out these kidnaps that he took it upon himself to go and carry out the negotiations. And he was by far the most effective person at building the trust relationship to carry out that negotiation. And so you paid all this money to all these big security companies who basically would send their negotiators, and what they would do is they'd bring this London taxi driver with them. Okay, so like you just don't know who this interlocutor is. Okay, but here's the thing. The person giving you the access, and this is what I really, really focus on, right, is why are they doing that? Right? Now, people always say to me it's because they want to make a difference, right? They're so upset about things. They're a really good person. And yeah, that's sometimes true. I have met people like that for sure, whistleblowers and things like that. But often there is an underlying reason there. And your safety is dependent on understanding that reason. Okay? And you can't go into a dangerous situation thinking that your access is guaranteed because someone's just good. Okay, you've got to really question their motivation. So, key things that I understand about motivation, right? What I say is these things don't look good when you see them on screen, right? But they are completely understandable from a human nature perspective. And once you understand them and you work with them, you're a lot safer. So, for example, ego is a huge motivating factor, right? So, going back to the example of the gang, why is a gang letting you into their turf to film their activities? Because they're criminals, right? They're selling drugs, they're doing all kinds of things, and your film might get them into trouble, might get them arrested. So why would they let you in there? So generally, it's because they think they're immune to prosecution, because they are so in control of their area that no one is going to touch them, or they're going to hide their face and be anonymous, right? Which is something you need to understand, because what if their anonymity is dropped afterwards, or somehow someone figures out who they are and then comes to kill them or arrest them? Are you responsible for them because they're your contributor? This happens a lot, right? Anonymity is often compromised in some way in filmmaking, and that then creates a huge, huge problem for the people who are promised anonymity. So, but why do gang members generally let you in there? Or not generally, but often, and it's because of ego, right? They want to have street cred. And they will allow themselves to be filmed, put on camera, because it plays to their ego. And I've had people go into the dodgiest parts of the world. Like, we had a filmmaker who went into San Pedro Sula in Honduras, which at one point had a higher murder rate than Baghdad. And he got in because the lead gang member basically wanted to be on camera. And he was prepared to guarantee the safety of the crew and everyone involved for a number of days. And there was like a layer of protection around the crew because the gang member wanted to be on camera. Okay. So if you understand that it's ego, you can work around why people are letting you in. The other one, which I'm not so keen on, but I understand, is money. Okay. Do people think they're going to financially benefit from this? So sometimes they think you're going to pay them, right? Which is really dangerous if you don't pay them. But sometimes they think, let's go back to the example of the gang. They're like, if I get my story out there, I will, make some money out of it. People are going to buy more of my drugs. My brand will be higher. Or I'll be able to tell the authorities via this journalist or this filmmaker that the other gang is really bad and it's not me, right? And so I'm going to financially benefit in some way from this. And it's really, really crucial you understand this, okay? Because if people are financially motivated in giving you access, they need to make that money. Otherwise, and if they don't, you're in danger, okay? The other big motivating factor in giving access is justice, right? So people are hardwired to feel injustice. Okay, so I have little kids, and my little 5-year-old, if I give my other child a bigger piece of chocolate, it's like, why did you give the other one a bigger piece of chocolate? It's unfair. It's unfair straight away, right? People are hardwired like that. And so if some sort of injustice has been done to someone, they often want to tell other people about it. Okay? And that's a lot of whistleblowers. They feel there's some sort of injustice, okay, against them. But it's really important to understand that, right? Because if they're out for justice, they are much more likely to protect you because you are their route to justice in some way or other. Okay. And lastly, there are these people at the bottom who are few and far between who want to make the world better. And there are definitely people like that out there. But you need to question, because that's what everyone says. Everyone says, "Oh, I want to help my community by talking to you," and actually, they've got an ulterior motive. They may not even realize what their ulterior motive is, but it's there. And if that ulterior motive is in some way challenged by what you're doing, they will turn on you very quickly. Okay, so understanding motivation is key to safety. Because once you understand it, you can work with it. I can work with people, gang members who have ego, who want money, who are after justice. I can work with that really easily, and I can understand how to put safety measures in place to keep you safe. Okay? So, very quickly, because I'm running out of time, once you're on, when you're doing stuff, right? So you've got to fall into a cadence of operation. And when you're going out to the gang or the community or whatever it is that you're doing, you should just have a standard operating procedure in place. So, and this is what we run with all of our clients in the field. Okay. So they're doing something that's high risk or hazardous in some way. We have identified that in the risk assessment, and then we say you need to have standard operating procedures in place. Low risk stuff, we don't bother with this. Okay, because you're just going to an office meeting or whatever it is. You don't need any of this stuff. So if it's high risk, everyone has to be briefed. They have to be on the same page about the story. You need to have good comms. Okay, and if you don't have good comms, like you're operating in a black spot, or people are going to take your phones away, or whatever it is, people need to know that in advance. You can't come out of the blue, right? So you need to have good comms between you and your base. If you've got, your family or whoever it is, because if someone's going to raise the alarm if you're missing, they need to know that you're in contact. Okay, when you're going to contact them. What happens if you don't contact them after 3, 4, 5 hours? When do they raise the alarm? Who do they raise the alarm to, right? They phone the police, or is that so if you're working with a gang and you don't check in with me and I phone the police and the police come down to the neighborhood looking for you, the gang are more likely to do something bad to you, right? Because now you've ratted them out. So that's where you go back to your interlocutor, person got your access, right? So what is the response? How do you raise the alarm? If you miss a check-in, what do I do about it? Do I track you when you're in the field, or does someone track you, right? So a very good app to use if you want to be tracked for your geolocation is Life 360. It's like a family tracking app. It's free. And if you're in trouble, I can see where you are, basically. And, give that to your family member or your team member, or whoever it is, right? If I have to come to your aid in some way, how am I going to do that? If I've got to go into the territory where the gang operates, am I going to just go wandering down the road going, where's my filmmaker? Has anyone seen this person? Or, how do I get in there safely and get you? Because you don't want someone to be hurt in the rescuing of you in some way or coming to get you. And if you are injured or hurt, what is your extraction plan? How are you going to get medical assistance? Particularly if you're working alone, can you perform first aid on yourself if that's viable? And, can you get yourself to the local emergency services or ambulance as fast as possible? And in many cases, I work in environments where there is no ambulance, right? There is no hospital to go to. So it's complete self-care. And that's what we plan for, right? That's the risk assessment at the beginning. So, and we try and keep it cheap, right? Lean and mean, basically. So we work out how we're going to do this as cheaply as possible. So things that you need to be aware of, right, that will cause problems.
Colin?
So if you are making sorry.
Oh, sorry. Just before we start this next section, someone actually had a question that is maybe 2 sections ago around digital security. They're asking when they had to register their business in the US, you're not allowed to use PO box addresses. So they don't have an office, which means they had to use their home address. And now it's public information. Is there any movement to keep that public info within offices? Is there any movement to
keep the office, the home data private?
And is there a way to remove it from being publicly viewed in files?
So basically, the US has much, I'm assuming this is in the US, but in the US, data privacy laws are much more open than, say, in Europe or the rest of the world, unfortunately. So what you need to do is go and check the state legislature about this this data effectively, and say, is there any way of keeping it private? In most states, there isn't. If you're a publicly registered business, you need to publish that information. Right. So again, what you do there is say, I have to put this information out there. Who are my adversaries? Are they likely to use this information against me? How do I mitigate against that? Okay. But it might be that the business registration organization are used to this problem, and they say, we can keep this data private, or there's a special request process that people have to go through to get that data. Okay, it just depends on your jurisdiction. Anything else?
Thank you. That was helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to particular areas that I get really worried about. Okay, so this is how you think of when you're doing your risk assessment or you're dealing with individuals, right? Especially with long form. Okay. If you mess around in these areas, there is a high likelihood that someone's going to do something to you in some way, right? I don't know what it is, but they're likely to do something. So, wealth. If your film in some ways threatens the livelihood or the money in the back pocket of the individual, they are going to react really, really quickly. And they will often react very defensively and very angrily. So if you're doing a film or an investigation into someone and they're going to be, have their bank account shut down as a result of that, you can expect a reaction pretty quickly. Okay. And during the process of making the film, they'll react once they figure out what you're doing. So be ready for that, right? And so that's mostly investigative journalism. But if you come across that, you need to be really conscious of it. Sorry, I'm just going to have a drink of water. My throat is very dry. Give me a second. Okay, so the other people you need to be really conscious of when you're working with them are criminals. That seems really obvious, but criminals break the law. So they are more likely to take a path that is not lawful against you than a lawful path. By that, I mean, if you're investigating an institution or a company or an organization, if they are lawful, they're going to sue you, right? Which is terrible and annoying, but they're not going to come and hurt you. If they're criminals, they're going to resort to violence pretty quickly, or some sort of aggressive tactic pretty quickly. So you need to be particularly careful with criminals. And here's the thing, right? I often speak to filmmakers who are like, oh, but I'm really friendly with this person. Like we go back to from childhood, we're like really good friends. And therefore they're not a threat to me. I'm like, anyone who breaks the law is a threat to you, right? Straight away. If they have a history of violence, you need to be very cautious when dealing with them. Obvious reasons, because they are more likely to resort to violence. If they have mental health issues, right, they are likely to be aggressive towards you. And with this one, the mental health issues, it's really important to think about post-broadcast or when you publish, right? So if you do something and you you make a film about a community, okay, and that community gets really upset with you, and they go online and they say, Colin is a terrible person. How could they have made this film about me, right? And they repeat and repeat this online. Someone with a mental health issue is more like to go, yes, Colin is a terrible person. I'm going to go round to their house and beat them up. Okay. And that's what Pizzagate in the States was, effectively, right? So you need to be very cautious with this, right? And going back to this online abuse, there are certain triggers of things that people say that result in people, not necessarily with mental health issues, but people who get very passionate about stuff, taking matters into their own hands. So one of the things that criminals and far righters do at the moment, particularly in Europe, I don't know about the States, but if they don't like pedophile, right, and that then triggers for people with mental health issues that if you accuse someone of being a pedophile, you do it repeatedly, someone might just come around and visit you because they have an issue with you, right? Which is made up, but that's how it works. So if you're getting that kind of online abuse and you're being accused of being a pedophile, there is an inherent threat towards you, not necessarily from the person who's putting out the information, but it's from the general public. And it's from someone in the general public who has a mental health issue. So you need to be really conscious of that. If they do drugs or drink a lot of alcohol, right, or substance abuse, right? So like a few years back, we made a lot of films about the opioid crisis in the States, fentanyl. A lot of filmmakers went in, had great access to communities who were hooked on opioids, but the individuals, the contributors, were often a threat to the filmmakers. Even though they knew them, even though they had great access, when they were high, there was a problem, and we had to build mitigation around looking after people when they were under the influence, so to speak. So you need to be really conscious of that, because obviously any sort of human behavior becomes exacerbated by drugs and alcohol. The other big one is threatening reputation. Okay, if you make a film and you threaten the reputation of an individual, you are discrediting them in some way, they get really, really angry, and it's almost quicker than like if you're taking money out of their back pocket, right? People are status-driven individuals, and they hate it when someone says you're bad, right? Or this individual is bad. And I've had a lot of filmmakers who, or a lot of journalists and content makers who carry out a story, a podcast, or something against someone, and their reputation is damaged in some way. The adversary is damaged in some way, and they come around to the house of the journalist and they'll throw a brick through the window, or they'll in some way try and hurt the individual, right? And if you threaten reputation, what often happens is the person resorts to violence very, very quickly, particularly if they've got like a violent history, right? They don't, even though they're lawful, the red mist will descend and they will basically attack straight away. And if you threaten people with incarceration, they also get very upset very quickly for obvious reasons, and they will try and shut you up. Okay, which is why when you're filming, like say at a protest or something, right, the person who's often attacked first by the angry protesters that are being filmed is the camera person, right? Why? Because they're doing something illegal, they're being caught on camera, and they don't want that action to be captured. And if it's broadcast, they'll go to jail, right? So they go after the camera person straight away, right? So it's not just post-broadcast, it's even during the action, right? So if you're filming someone doing drugs or selling drugs, that's the threat of incarceration, and they're more likely to react. And lastly, which is really relevant to all of you when you're lone working. If you are lone working, which most of you will be doing for large stretches of time, if you're doing anything that has the hint of hazard attached to it, you need to go through this whole process of risk assessment. Okay, so I've talked about digital security already, so I've sort of jumped ahead with this.
There was one more question about digital security, which was about the Life 360 app. Someone's wondering, it's not urgent, but would you rely on the Find My uh, that application on Apple?
Yeah, there are people who do. Like, I work with people who say, well, we've got to find my phone. I'll be honest, I find it quite tricky to use it. Maybe I'm just a bit of a bozo when it comes to this, even though I'm a big Apple user. Yeah, I just don't like it as much as I like Life 360. I don't think it's as accurate, but look, it's free. I mean, Life 360 is free as well, but right, yeah, look, it works, right? If you give me a sort of rough location of where you are, that's better than if I've got to come and get you, that's better than not having it. So yeah, anything that does that is beneficial. But again, remember, right? Like if you this goes back to this risk versus reward balancing thing, risk assessment, right? So if you are pushing out your location to me as your safety person or your backup, could your adversary be intercepting that data? Okay. And in certain parts of the world and in the US, like if you're dealing with criminals or the government, they can get that data, right? If they put malware on your device and that kind of stuff. So you need to be really conscious when you put this information out there or not. Okay. Does that answer the question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. So, yeah, look, so one of the things that I get called up a lot about right now is people become inured to the abuse, but they really don't like it. And they're getting a lot of abuse. So, you need to filter the abuse, as in identify which is the abuse that really matters and the abuse that doesn't. And like I say, if it's really vociferous abuse, it's probably not great for your mental health to be looking at it, but you need to get someone to do it, right? Or the threats. So most threats come through on social media. So like Twitter, famous for it. If you're being threatened on Twitter, you need to look at the language. So I call it Twitter, but X, you know what I mean, right? If you're on social media and you're getting threats, you got to look at the language. But let's come back to that in a second, okay? If you're being texted or you're getting WhatsApp messages, what it means is they have your telephone number. And that's a problem because that's how you access your bank, right? That's an identity thing. So you need to be very conscious if you're getting that kind of abuse that your number has been compromised. And what that means is you've got to go out and change everything to do with your number that's sensitive. So like financial agreements, your mortgage on your house, that kind of stuff should have a different number if that's happened. What we advise, but this is quite costly, is we say if you are doing a really sensitive documentary or project, get a separate number during the course of that project. But that's a pain, right, for many people, and especially if your project is lasting for years and years, it's hard to manage two phones, but ideally you would have a personal and a professional phone. But if your phone number has been compromised, you need to move to that status straight away. Don't ignore it. And I work with a lot of people who ignore it and then really regret that, right, when they're getting when they're getting messages to their phone. As in like the text or WhatsApp. So when it comes to general messages, right, whether social media or text or whatever, they are designed to intimidate you. Right? They're not designed, but that's the purpose of the action is to intimidate you, to scare you, to get you to stop. Generally, right? That's like 99% of all of this abuse. They just want to, it's like social media has unveil the darker side of humanity, and it basically allows us to just, splurge out whatever we're thinking in our head without any sort of filter, and you can say the most horrendous things to people online, and the idea behind it is that it doesn't matter, right? Because certainly the platforms don't stop it. So people say all kinds of horrendous stuff on social media, and it really freaks people out, as I'm sure most people are aware. But where you need to suddenly like switch on and say, okay, this is not just general horrible abuse, this is really specific, is if like really personal details are included in the messaging. So like the names of your kids, right? Or we know where you live, or we know you're in the gym right now, right? That happens a lot, where like, especially to women, where the perpetrator tries to indicate that they know the geography of the individual, right? Like the geographic location, right? So you should be conscious of that, but it shouldn't overly worry you. Like if they're saying stuff like, "Oh, we know you go to the gym," right? Especially if you put on. So I had a case where there was a individual who, when she went to the gym, she would often get a message saying like, "We know you're working out right now." It would freak her out. But what they had done, the adversary had done, is they'd gone through her accounts, her social media account. They weren't tracking. Her assumption was, I'm being tracked. Okay. They weren't tracking her. It's just that she had posted quite a lot of selfies at the same time every day when she was in the gym. Right. And so they knew that she would go to the gym on a certain cadence. So they were just chancing it and saying, "Oh, we know you're in the gym. We're looking at you now." And it really freaked her out. Okay. So again, you've got to be conscious of personal information, but you've got to go back to your social media footprint or your digital footprint and say, could they have extracted this without sort of knowing a lot of stuff about me, as in like getting into my phone or putting malware on my phone and tracking me. So, but when there's personal details released, what that means is your adversary is not just trying to intimidate you. Okay, they've invested time to find out about you. And that's when you need to start thinking, okay, I need to do something about this. And if they start saying things like, Colin lives at this location, maybe you want to go pay him a visit and just tell him what you think about his work. Okay. Which a lot of people do, right? Or Colin is at this film launch, go let your voice be heard. That can be read as an incitement to violence, particularly if a lot of the things they're being saying is, you're really bad in some way, you've done something really bad, you've damaged the community or whatever it is, and now go let them know what you think. Okay, so you need to pay attention to that, especially if you're like publicizing your the festivals you're at, or where your screenings are happening and things like that. You need to be really conscious of that. And then you've got to look at the language of what they're saying, right? Now, there are different ways of distinguishing language. It's quite complicated, but what I would say to you, a quick way of doing this is if you're getting messages that you don't like and they're upsetting you, put them into an AI like Perplexity or ChatGPT and say, analyze the language of this threat from a fixated intimidation perspective. And is this a genuine threat, right? And that prompt should give you a really good idea if this is a serious threat or not, right? Because there's a whole bank of research about the communications or the malicious communications, like the sort of type of language that's used, and AI is really good at analyzing it. So if you're worried about the type of threat you're receiving, put it into an AI and see what it says about it. And then it doesn't work 100% of the time, right? So don't ignore your gut if the AI is saying, "Oh, this is fine." If you're still upset about it, like report it to the police. But just look at the language. And most people, their gut tells them when something is off. Okay. So, and what you've got to do is distinguish between general threats. So people saying like, you should get HIV, that is a threat, but it's not saying I'm going to come and inject you with a vial of HIV. Okay, because that is a direct threat. And the first one is you should get HIV. That's a very common thing that's used out there. Okay. But again, those slurs, like I was saying, if they're triggers like you're a pedophile, that's an incitement of violence. Okay, so you need to react to that, and every story has like sort of different, or every community has, or area has a different sort of incitement to violence or trigger. So you need to be conscious of the context that you live in, or you're operating in. I'm just conscious of time. I've got 4 minutes, so I'll stop after this slide. But listen, if you are targeted online or you're doxxed, and you're genuinely scared and you think, the individual really means it, or there's mental health indications, go straight to the police, flag it to the police. And one of the things you need to do is when you are being abused is keep a record of the information, right? Don't just delete the threads, right? Or the tweets or whatever they are, right? Screen grab them and put them in a folder. And one of the hardest parts of my job is when someone phones me up and says, look, I've got this abuser. I'm getting really worried about what they're saying. They've been abusing me for like the last 6 months. And I say, okay, show me. And they're like, actually, we've been deleting the threads, because what happens is the abuser often takes down the threads afterwards, right? And they say, oh, I haven't kept any record of it. I've only got the last couple of ones. I'm like, well, I kind of need to see the whole progression of the thread to understand if this person is really serious or not. And I need it for an evidentiary purpose. So when I go to the police, I can say, this person really means business, right? Here is the evidence of it. So you need to document this. And what really helps is if you do this systematically, okay? So there's no point in just giving me a giant file of screen grabs, because that takes a huge amount of my time to like sort it out. And you just give that to the police, they're not going to sort that out. Okay, so you need to kind of summarize it, write a document, spreadsheet, and say, this is the date, this is the threat, this is what happened, here's the screenshot, okay? Because the police, they've got a lot of things going on, and if you make it hard work for them, they're not going to get involved. And what I would say is the US authorities are historically really good at reacting to this kind of stuff, okay? And they're much better than generally European authorities. So, and I'm assuming that most people on this call are from the US, so forgive me if lots of people are not. And like I said, you should monitor your accounts if you can, but if it's too upsetting for you, for your own mental health, you need to get someone else to monitor it, right? And part of the issue I face often is the people who are being abused, they need to stay online, right, for their brand, to keep pushing stuff out, as the question came earlier. But they're being abused and they're kind of exposing themselves to this mental onslaught every day. And they're like, I have to do it because I have to get the brand out there, and they can't disengage. And that's when you need someone else to help you with it, right? And it doesn't have to be a professional service, but you turn to a friend, a colleague, or someone to help you with it. But I deal with a lot of people who are very anxious because of this kind of abuse. Maria, do you want me to go on, or should I stop? Do you have any questions?
I think I would love to go on, only because I know there's very, very good information that you're going to share, if that's okay with you. I had one question in the chat that is more specific to this person's specific project, and I'm just wondering if we can answer that before we keep going.
Okay, sure. What's the question? Sorry, I can't see it in the chat.
Yeah, no problem. So they say, I have a short documentary that's focused on a Mexican-American family and their success in the wine industry. The grandfather came without papers, but now is documented. The family hires many people who come over from Mexico for the harvest and who are not citizens, and those individuals are in the film. To protect their identities, should I take out all the names and locations? The film has already gone to many festivals a few years ago and won awards, but I was considering doing a recut to take out all the names and potential locations.
Interesting question. So I think what you need to analyze is if the original can still be accessed in some way, right? After you do the recut. So by doing the recut and putting it out there, are you advertising the fact that you've sort of changed the original? Okay. And are people going to go and look at that and then say, well, there's no smoke without a fire. Why have they done a recut? Let me go check this out. And then you kind of have drawn attention to the very thing you don't want people to notice. So I would say check if the original is out there in some way, like someone streamed it on YouTube illegally or something like that. And yeah, like I think in this day and age, if it's not out there, a recut's not a bad idea. I think you should probably reach out to the individuals who are involved if you can and see how they're feeling. But yeah, I think, look, it could be used against them, right? For sure, in this current context. So yeah, I think it would be a good idea to see if you can take some sort of action to protect these people if you're particularly worried about them. But if it was a few years ago, I mean, I don't know what you mean by a few years ago. If it was many years ago, then it probably isn't valid. But I don't know. I don't know. If it was like last year, then yeah, I would definitely do a recut. Is that okay, Maria? Anything else?
Yeah, that's great. Nothing else for now, but yeah, I think we can keep going because I know the information you have to share is really valuable.
Okay. So, after being threatened online, as I said, the next step is often surveillance. And if it's physical surveillance, then you need to be really worried. Okay, because digital surveillance is often quite cheap, right? And it's generally carried out by like highly sophisticated adversaries like government or criminal gangs who have access to hackers and things like that. It's or people who have technical skills, right? But physical surveillance is expensive. So if someone is following you around, either they're like a fixated stalker or a really, really riled up person, or they're quite serious about doing you harm. So physical surveillance is expensive and it's time consuming and it's a pain for the individuals. And what it implies is they want to do something to you, right? So if they want to do something to you, they're going to come and they're going to have to know what your patterns are, right? Now, think about it like this, right? So if you have already announced your presence somewhere, so think about Salman Rushdie, right? At that, I think it was a book launch that he was at, or I forget what he was attending, but his presence was announced at an event and someone came to sit in the audience and then stab him, right, in the US. So in that particular incident, no one needs to carry out surveillance because you are pre-advising the perpetrator or the adversary where you're going to be. So if you're getting online threats, you don't want to be telling people where you are and what you're doing. Okay. Now, I'm not criticizing Salman Rushdie because he's lived with a lifetime of threats, but that's a very realistic prospect for someone in his situation. So if you are getting threats where someone is saying, I'm going to come and kill you, don't tell them where you're going to be. But if you're not telling people where you're going to be and there's no reason for them to know anything about you because you've been very good at keeping your digital profile low, they'll start to follow you because they'll want to know where you live. They want to know. And so they'll start out at your office and follow you home, right? Because if you work in a built up place, they don't want to do something to you in front of a lot of people. They want to do it to you in the middle of the night when they knock on the door and they hit you with a baseball bat or something like that. And so if you spot people traveling around following you, be very conscious. This line about individuals on motorbikes, that's really relevant in not so much in the US, but in other parts of the world, right? And I would say invest in cameras and invest in community presence, right? So if there's neighborhood watch, for example, go attend the neighborhood watch meeting, get to know your neighbors because I can't tell you how many times, right? Journalists have been on the way home and a neighbor's phoned up and said, "Don't come here because the police are here or something's going on," right? And they don't go home. Now that's not so much in the US, that's in other countries, but it's a good lesson, right? So if you have a doorbell, you can obviously see who's sitting on your doorstep when they ring the bell before you answer it. So it's a good idea. So the other thing is, like, the important thing is when you are being threatened, when you're receiving a lot of abuse, don't try and hide from your feelings, because it's really isolatory, and it's really unpleasant. Okay, so acknowledge that this is scary and talk to people around about it. Okay, and one of the worst things that happens in my business is kind of when someone says, "Oh, look, I'm really worried. I keep getting these threats," and the boss goes, "Don't worry about it. We all get threats," right? Because that signal in the noise might be there, and that individual is seeing the signal, right? So if you have staff members, if you're working on a team, and someone says that to you, pay real attention to it. Okay, don't gaslight them effectively. And if this is you or individuals on your teams, inform friends, family, police, those kind of, anyone in authority who can help you, right? And if you're working with a bigger news outlet, an organization, get them involved, right? I already talked about the neighbors and the cheap camera, but basically get lighting. Lighting is key, right? People like to come around to your house at night, effectively, if they're going to do something bad, and have an alarm. And what you do is you plan. If someone comes to the front door, and look, this is a bit scary what I'm saying, right? So you don't have to do this unless you really think the threat is there. Okay, so one of the people I worked with in the distant past was someone who was a researcher and used to write papers about the far right, like extremist groups in America. And that individual started getting a lot of threats. They were concerned that their home address had been compromised. And when I spoke to them and said, what are you doing? They had and we had this whole conversation about neighbors, etc., but they had a plan. They were like, if someone comes to the front door, this is how I'm getting out. I'm going out the back window, I'm going up the hill, and I know how to get to a neighbor's house on the other side of the hill, and then I'll call the police. Okay? So have a plan if you are being threatened. Okay? And if you're in a property that doesn't have a back door or window and you can't get out, be ready to phone the police or someone who's going to come quickly, right? So what I'm saying is anticipate it, don't hide from it if you're concerned about it, and plan for it, because it can save your life. I would say if you are a victim of vandalism or people are turning up, right? So what happens is before people turn up to hurt you, they will often present, right? It's called, they will turn up and say, "Stop doing what you're doing." Okay, so they'll come to your office and say, "Why are you doing this? Why have you done this thing? I'm really angry with you." Confrontational violence, right? On that slide, concentric circle slide. If they do that, you need to tell the authorities straight away, right? Because when people come in person, it means they're really upset. And then they go home and they think about it. And if you do the same thing again, right? So they say, "Don't come and interview this community. I don't want to see you there." And the next day you go back, or 3 days later you go back, and they go, "I told you not to do this." That's when they're going to do something to you. Okay? So that's when you need to phone the authorities and say, "Look, I'm scared for my safety." And again, just like if you have online abuse, if you're being targeted anyway, take physical note of what's happened, document it. So when you go to the police, they actually believe you. And, also in the US, it's very common to seek legal intervention, right? Like a restraining order. If you are really worried about your physical security, it's a good idea to get out of your local, the place you're normally based, So go on holiday for like a week, or go visit family members or something like that. Go to a friend's house. Don't tell people you're doing it, which I've had happen in the past, that, we're relocating someone for their safety and they put it on Instagram saying, I have to leave because, I'm going to my sister's house, that kind of thing, right? Don't do that. And don't go to your favorite coffee shop if you've left your location, because that's where they come and find you. This sounds really simple, stupid, as in like who would do this, but people have done this kind of thing, right? So avoid going to places that you frequent regularly, and if you are really worried about your safety, go to a place where there's a local police presence, unless the police are the problem. Okay, and keep family members and friends appraised of where you are. It's really important, if you are moving your location, generally have some sort of access control, right? So if you're moving to a friend's house, you don't answer the door, the friend is going to answer the door, right? But you've got to brief your friend about it. Or ideally, you would have a sort of receptionist or a door person, and it's a good idea to seek elevation, so go to upper floors, okay? And lastly, if someone does actually confront you, it's really important that you use your body language to sort of de-escalate the situation. It's really hard for me to explain this slide online, which is why I've left it to the end. But one of the things you should do is sort of Google de-escalation training, and or how to de-escalate a violent situation or a confrontational situation. There are lots of videos on YouTube that you can watch about this. And yeah, basically just follow those lines. Unfortunately, we're having to do this more and more with our sort of journalistic constituents, because people the sort of barriers of engagement have come down, and people don't see an issue with coming to offices or homes to shout at people who have done something they don't like, right? So learning about how to de-escalate a situation is really important these days. I'm going to stop here, if that's all right.